Welcome everyone to our self-healing cloud security and compliance best practices. This is an interesting topic that's getting a lot of attention, and people are realizing that more advances needs to take place in this area. So, from a thought leadership perspective, we said to ourselves, let's push something out the door with all the capabilities and discussions that we had internally with our customers, and we wanted to share that with the community at large. So again, welcome to this session, and get ready for the next 30 minutes. We're going to have some interesting conversations. Also, just housekeeping, we are recording this session. And so for those of your friends that you would like to have this recording sent to, you'll have a link sent to you via email, and you'll be able to freely share that. And we're going to put that on YouTube as well. Okay, so with that, let me kick this off. My name is Kamran Mehboob. I'm the Director of Product Management for Security and Compliance Capabilities here at Cloudnosis. We're a platform company that delivers end-to-end solution for cloud security and focusing on compliance specifically and automations. So again, I work with many customers of ours, and hearing a lot about this self-healing. So I want to get into that topic today with you. Our agenda is going to be below what you see there, and really homing in on how to build an expert system. I think most of you are here to kind of understand what are some of the principles. So we're going to talk about the three principles of infrastructure config accountability model, and what does that entail, and how does that translate into building this expert system. We're going to talk a little bit about cloud vendors limitations as well, and what they are, so you understand what the gaps are and how you need to fill those gaps. And then we specifically are going to teach you some sample healing flows. So our webinars are not just a lot of talk, and we don't really show you how to do things. We actually show you how to build things, and we give you examples of that as well. So this is the cool thing about our webinars, and that's how we have a lot of repeat folks like you guys here. Okay, and then at the very tail end, we're going to have Cloudnosis self-healing security and compliance short overview for about 3 to 4 minutes. And then we're going to get into the Q&A session. So in the Q&A, you can ask any questions, which hopefully I'll be able to answer. If not, we will definitely get back to you. Okay, so that's what we're going to learn today. Those few things on the agenda, and so I'm going to dive right into it. Okay, so many of you are probably getting endless alerts by now, because people are investing in monitoring solutions on the cloud, and everybody's asking, well, these alerts are great, but it requires too much time to review them, and it takes too much time to actually go physically fix the infrastructure, and it requires too much expertise. And everybody's strapped for resources. So first of all, even if you do get the alert, how do you fix it? And should you fix it? And what the priority of fixing should take place? Let's say you got 100 alerts today. Okay, which ones you're going to fix first? So we're going to talk about a risk process as well with that. And cloud vendors today, you have literally thousands of configurations, and it's just not humanly possible to actually go in and check those manually. So you should be running a monitoring solution by now. And again, if you have that cloud maturity scale that you're shooting for. Yes, there are products like AWS Config and logs that are in there that helps you, but again, they generate a lot of alerts, but they don't really tell you how to fix things. So we're going to get into how to create this healing process and how to create your set of best practices. So there are three core principles which you need to follow to create this entire flow, and then at the end of it start creating these best practices. So some of the basic functions, some of it I'm sure you must be doing already, which is the very first one is configuration management. And this is where you have your golden templates identified for your infrastructure. It has security configurations in it. It'll have, let's say, your three-tier architecture has to be spun up for HIPAA or PCI compliance type workloads. And it has all the settings in there, in terms of disaster recovery, in terms of having jump drives to be able to go from one host to another, and so on. And then you have change management principles around that. And then you have lots of control scripts. So hopefully you have that organized in some capability that you've invested in. Um, and that's all great, okay? The next thing in line is really gets into the DevOps flow, which is your CI/CD automated pipelines, and you should be having some form of static and dynamic scans or testing going on in your flows to reduce any vulnerabilities before you go live. And there's lots of creative, cool products out there: Chef, Puppet, Ansible, many others that you can build recipes and playbooks and so on. So again, that's part of your deployment automation. Okay. So the first thing is getting the golden script, the golden templates done, and then be able to actual run the automation, and then be able to track the automation flow into your cloud infrastructure. And the last thing is, okay, so let's say you are up and running, and the last stage is you need to look at monitoring and management of the infrastructure. So here you're going to have drift management controls. You're going to have vulnerability tracking, right? You have to make sure that the host level and even at the infrastructure level, everything is up to date. For example, the load balancers. There's a certain type of an attack that's taking place, and you need to make sure that you're at TLS 1.2 or higher, and so on. And then hopefully you have some, or at least start to think about um, along these either drift changes or alerts or vulnerability. Then you have some form of automated remediation against the baseline, and not just the baseline, but also against best practices, because you can't create enough baselines. You have to go with some either industry driven or through experiences, past or present, and build these best practices. Uh, so those are the things. Okay. So I'm going to talk about this machine metadata monitoring and controls and alert and drifts quite a bit, which ties into all of this process of automated remediation and self healing processes. So all these components are part of self healing, but keep in mind that configuration management doesn't really heal, neither does deployment automation, and infrastructure automation is where the healing process takes place. Okay. Now, some of the healing you do get in the deployment automation phases if you invest in the right solutions, where product vendors for CI/CD pipelines, they are building, for example, automatic patching. Okay, so definitely you should be investing in that, because that'll be part of your self-healing strategy. Okay, going to the next slide, and so here, uh, you know, we need to ask the question: okay, so how do we solve this self-healing challenge? So we finally recognize, yes, that's true, it's happening in my infrastructure. More and more workloads are going in, and I'm having a hard time just making sure that everything is aligned to our standards or to best practices. Okay, so there are a few steps that you need to follow here. So there are about 5 steps, and really the first 4 is what really matters. So number 1, record machine metadata. Okay, and you must be saying, well, what is that? Which I'll get into in very detail. And number 2 is apply best practices. And again, what are the best practices? We'll talk about that. And number 3, prioritize, right? So we said there's too many alerts, too many things going on. How do we focus on the most important thing? And how do we identify what's important? So you need to perform a risk assessment, and risk assessment has to be against some baseline, either your business risks, okay? certain systems can go down, or certain systems have very sensitive data, or certain systems are compliance specific systems, right? So that prioritization has to take place. And then from that, you can start building remediation flows to say, yes, we are going to build some of these remediation flows for these prioritized risks. And then we're going to generate, basically generate these KPI reports and audit management process. So looking at these, you're going to say, okay, so what's a best practice, first of all? Well, a best practice is, let's say, and there are examples below, is S3 bucket versioning turned on? Okay. Why is it a best practice? Because S3 bucket has generally lots of log data that you're holding and other data, and you need to make sure that the versioning is turned on, because if someone deletes it accidentally, you could lose all that data. And there are other examples. Is the ELB cipher level at TLS 1.2 or higher? That's a best practice. So how do you record the machine data on it? Well, we're going to get into that in more detail, and then of course you have to assign risk elements to these types of some best practices are very specific around your compliance specific areas, like some of the ones that I'm actually mentioned here below. One is disaster recovery, the other one is cipher levels, and so on. Okay. Uh, let's go to the next slide, and we can discuss automated remediation, self-healing flow. So what would that simple flow would look like? A very simple flow would be where you are getting a ticket, okay, or you're getting an alert from someone, or either a post in a Slack channel or PagerDuty, whatever you're using, they're all good. And then you need to say, okay, let's analyze and let's work on our prioritization checklist. And based on that prioritization checklist or standard policy that you may have, you're going to say, I'm going to remediate this. Okay, so a remediation flow, at least in the AWS environment, would look like where you're getting a SNS alert, and then you have to evaluate that in the middle once you get the alert. And then based on the evaluation, you would kick off a remediation function, which will generally is a Lambda function, which does the automation for fixing things in your infrastructure. And then after that's completed, then you're going to update the compliance reports if you have any, and also close out the ticket. Okay, and then hopefully everything is good to go. You can generate a report, and everybody's happy. Okay, so that's the kind of flow that our automation tools follow. Our Cloud Gnosis platform for AWS. This is the flow that we follow. Okay, the next three slides, before I dive into very detailed on around exactly what is this machine data, how do you put it together, and how do you synthesize it into meaningful things, I want to make sure that in our audience that some basics are covered. The next three slides, I'm just going to go in literally 1.5 minutes, real fast, because some of it may be very basic to some of you that's been around the block with the cloud. So Amazon has this thing called share security model, which means that the bottom part that you see on the screen, Amazon says, I will take care of this, which is of the cloud, which means the infrastructure, uh, making sure that everything is fenced in, and people have background checks done, and all the edge locations, and so on. However, the applications that you put in to the infrastructure and platforms, and all the access to it, including encryption and traffic and networks and operating system, that's you, Mr. Customer. You're responsible for that, and you need to manage security for that. So many folks I run into, they don't know this. So again, I'm just kind of throwing that out there. This is an Amazon slide. You can get it directly from Amazon, and we're just cutting and pasting here. Okay, so it's all pretty straightforward. Okay, this is an example of a three-tier reference architecture based on NIST compliance. And NIST is the security compliance that you should look into if you're not. According to Gartner, over 50% of organizations in US will be compliant by 2020. That's the prediction. So NIST, you can look into that. And what the points I'm trying to drive here is that for a typical NIST infrastructure, which you should be having, it's pretty complex very quickly. You have a lot of moving parts in a workload environment. You have VPCs, S3s, auto scaling, Bayesian access. You have lots and lots of things going on. These are some of the things that I'm pointing out to you. And each of these things has its own set of configurations, and each of these things has its own set of best practices. Okay, so and these are hundreds and hundreds of these widgets that are in, let's say, in the AWS platform, and very similar to Azure and Google. They're all about the same. Okay, from a services standpoint, some may have more than others, and so on. Okay, last slide is if you're wondering, well, what is this NIST compliance? There's actually a workbook that you can download from the Amazon site, and there's a link there. And you can also download what is called a cloud formation template, which is infrastructure as code, and it'll generate that reference architecture that I showed you in the last slide. Okay, so all that is there, for you to consume. Okay, so that kind of takes care of that. Now let's get into the real nitty-gritty of it. And you really got to pay attention on this slide because there's a lot of moving parts here, but I'll go very slowly. So basically focus on your right side of the slide where it says AWS Infra Logs and Config, and then it says Easy in blue. Okay, just kind of start from there and go down. Okay, so this metadata collection and remediation flow, you really can't remediate anything in the Amazon world unless you know what's going on with your services. And to know what's going on with your services, you need to basically pull all this data that you see here. And I'm going to go through step by step. And then once you pull it through, that's all your metadata. And then you apply best practices, you apply your risk rating, and then you generate auto remediation control policies. I'm actually going to show you an example. I'm going to show you two examples of this in detail, step by step. So you'll be able to build this on your own. So first of all, what's easy? Well, what's easy is that you can turn on, just by a click, config, CloudTrail, CloudWatch, VPC flow logs, okay? Very easily, the second box, you can turn on AWS services logs, like S3 logs, RDS logs, and so on. That's easy. That's just a click of a button and you're done. The third one, also fairly easy. Maybe a little bit more work because you have applications, you have custom applications that are running on your EC2 instances, and they're generating server logs and audit logs and so on, and basically all those things. And you have to kind of push those out into an S3 bucket, or somewhere that you can actually pull them in and make some sense out of them. And then the last one, again, the first three boxes are easy. The last one is actually fairly complex. Fairly complex because it requires a lot of expertise and know-how of the AWS infrastructure, and you really need to know what you're looking for and how to pull that. So again, this is all around configuration changes, all around security groups, all around networks, disks, and all of these things are API-based collections. So you have to invest your time and energy in this. There's really no escaping it. If you want to create a very closed-loop, tight system and control security and meet certain compliance regulations that you may have in your business, everybody has GDPR compliance pretty much. If you're a global company or doing business with EU countries, so that's the box that you kind of have to invest in over time. So all this data gets into a bucket, and now you have to. It's not a business ready data. You have to make some sense out of it. Okay, what is it telling me? And I need to compare this data against my best practices. So that's where the best practices come in, because just because the bucket is on or off, what does that mean? What does that mean to that workload? You have to have those best practices in place. Okay, so that's why I talked about that early on. And you must be saying, well, we don't really have best practices a whole lot, and we don't really know what they are. So can you help us with that? And the answer is yes. I'll help you with that. I'll tell you, where they're at, and how you can start adding to that library. And then a very strong area is compliance, and looking at the risk rating. So, all this data is going to generate a lot of alerts, going to generate a lot of data, and you need to be able to say, okay, I'm only going to focus on top 10, and I'm going to focus on just those top 10s and make sure that I have auto remediation or self-healing functions built. So I don't have to worry about them, and my security and compliance posture will be pretty high if I get those things done, right? And it's different for every business, but quite frankly, it's pretty common. There's a bunch of controls that are very straightforward and pretty much apply to every business. It doesn't matter if you're selling bicycles or airplanes. Okay, so this is an important slide to understand the flow, because this is what you need to do, and you need to invest your time and energy, into this. Okay, I said I was going to give you an example of what is this machine data and what are the best practices and how do you do this. Okay, so first of all, I'll give you an example of a function called VPC. It stands for Virtual Private Cloud, and every cloud vendor has this. It's basically, think of it like a perimeter around a bunch of resources, like EC2s and disks and so on. Okay, it's more of a networking function. So virtual private cloud VPC. Okay, the question is, how do I audit VPC? Because that's one of the first things that they'll some hacker will go through, or through security groups, one or the other. And you need to ask those questions. Okay, how do I audit this? Well, if you look again on your right where it says custom rules written by you, and so these are the best practices, and I've laid out quite a few of them here, and these are just some of them. Okay, so for example, unused VPC internet gateways. If you have those, you need to get rid of them. Or if you have ineffective network ACL deny rules, you need to look at those and you need to firm them up. And unrestricted network ACL inbound traffic or enabling flow logs, and basically the list goes on. Like tunneling and gateways and peering. VPC peering across account is generally not preferred, and you shouldn't be doing those kinds of things. That's across AWS accounts. So like two different AWS accounts, two different VPCs, and they're peering across each other. Okay, so these are some of the rules, right? And the details of these rules, I'll show you where to get them. But once you have them, then you have to write the APIs to actually pull all that together, which requires expert understanding of the AWS security at the component level or at the service level. Okay, so it is time well invested, in my opinion, extremely well invested, and that's something you should be doing. Now, what's easy? Again, the easy part is I talked about in a previous slide. You can turn on the VPC logs, the Cloud Trail, the CloudWatch, the AWS Config, and Trusted Advisor. Okay, all those things are good, and you should be running them, including Guard Duty and Security Hub. There's another product that AWS released last reInvent. All those things are good, and you definitely should be running them. But keep in mind that all these disparate data sets, you have to pull them together and do log correlations. And after log correlations, you have to figure out, based on a risk model, what you're going to fix and focus on. So, lots and lots of effort. It's not easy, and that's where the Sumo Logic and Splunk of the world have made their business, in this white box area. Okay. Um, but there's this area here, which is the machine data area. That's pretty much kind of neglected, or companies are still innovating in those areas slowly but surely. And of course, Cloud Gnosis started here. I mean, we basically focus on custom rules, all the machine data, and then we go patch clouds in near real time. And that's really what our focus. Okay, so VPC, we talked about what this is. I'm going to give you another example which you might relate better, which is an S3 bucket. Most of you know that almost 99% of the hacks so far has been around S3 buckets. This is basically a disk on a cloud server, and they left it open, meaning it was open to the world, right? So S3 bucket authentication was full access, read write, and that can be very easily set. Uh, just because somebody's in a hurry, they want to launch code, and they just want to test their applications. When they're done, they forget to tear down the infrastructure, and now the entire data is exposed. Um, so again, all these checks that you're looking at, these are, by the way, some of the S3 bucket checks, not all of them, that are here, that are noted here, and they require considerable API writing. And again, you need to write these rules, you need to write these APIs, you need to collect the data, you need to test the condition, and then off you go. So so that's kind of the flow for the S3 buckets, right? Because you have to, and I'm giving you an example of these, and you can get, basically look at these sample policies here at the link below, right? You can find some of these policies. All these policies are actually out there on the internet. You just have to kind of grab them all together and basically prioritize on what you want to do, and then kind of go from there. Okay, so I gave you the two examples. Now, after you do all this, yes, we're talking about self-healing cloud, but at the same time, that same data set that you're collecting, that can also be used for your business reporting, for example, GDPR reporting, compliance reports, right? Someone can come up to you and say, show me, what are you guys doing for GDPR compliance report? And if you have that data organized, you can generate something like this pretty easily. Obviously, it requires compliance expertise, obviously requires AWS expertise, obviously requires marriage of the two of those people sitting together and making rule sets, that this is how we're going to measure success and basically get that out the door. So this type of report, you can say, hey, we inventoried these items, we checked the access control, encryption, all these different control sets. Some of them passed, some of them failed, and the ones that failed, we have a remediation plan that we're working on, and all this maps to Article 25, which is one of the big sections in GDPR for privacy, monitoring and protection. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of what you need to do. And you must be asking more, okay, that's all great, but where do I start from these policies? Well, these policies and best practices, you can start with Center for Internet Security, CIS controls. So they publish CIS AWS benchmarks, they publish Azure benchmarks, and they also publish Google benchmarks as well. So all three cloud benchmarks are there, and these benchmarks are basically, you can go in, for example, for Amazon, there are 44 controls, and these are some of the controls that you see here, top 16. And these are test conditions that you actually literally go in and open the console, go to your S3 buckets policies, and check what's going on, and then mark, either with a pencil or paper or a pen, and then say, okay, yep, we passed that one. Or most likely, you will write some automations that can do this for you, automatically. Where do you get this set of rules? If you just Google CIS AWS benchmarks, you will get to the link below. It's like 160-page PDF file that really explains these rules very well. It even tells you the API calls, or the CLI commands, I should say, that you can use to actually pull the machine data and do that analysis. So again, this is your starting point. This is not your end point. And by the way, none of these rules kind of go into areas like encryption, and those sort of things. So if you're a compliance specific workload, then you have to do something specific for that, which these rules don't have policy along those lines. Okay. So, in conclusion, what do we learn so far? And again, I always like to keep our webinars short and simple, to about 30 minutes or so. So we're approaching about 30 minutes. So, understand your infrastructure metadata. Okay, why? Because that's the heartbeat of your infrastructure, and you need to listen to that heartbeat to listen to understand what it's saying. Okay, and then after you listen to that, then you got to apply your best practices and prioritize on a risk-based approach. Security is always a risk-based approach because there's just too many things in a system, and you can't fix them all. You can only fix those that are the highest risk and leave the rest alone. There's just not enough manpower and money to fix all issues all the time. And the last thing is, I'm sure you're recognizing by now that building a self-healing remediation process or automation is very important. And this is kind of like the new norm for the cloud, which drive enforcement and accountability. So the first phase of innovation in the cloud was around automation was purely just executing things for you. Hey, I got the infrastructure up. You press a button, everything is up and running. Next phase was, okay, tell you what, I'll monitor it for you. So I'm monitoring to make sure that everything is good. That's the phase we're in right now. Almost 99.99% of the vendors out there are just doing nothing but monitoring and generating lots and lots of alerts. Okay, that's good. That's all good. The third thing is you need to now go into this self-healing mode or remediation mode. And Cloud Gnosis is really at the forefront of this. We've been doing this for a long time, pretty good at it. So that's our capability. So with that, I'll give you just a 2-minute commercial about our platform. So again, Cloud Gnosis is a platform company that has a purpose-built security and compliance solution for AWS Cloud and Azure Cloud, and we have self-healing functions or auto remediation functions built in from ground up. And it's all about alert on vulnerabilities. It's continuous compliance. It's scanning every hour on the hour. It also has real-time threat detection with our Eagle Eye product. So it does real-time protection where we don't have to scan for it. We see the change and we act on it immediately. It's policy-driven, self-healing, fast remediation, and we support compliance regulations. So this is kind of where we started. We take a regulation set, security set, whether it's NIST or HIPAA or PCI or ISO, and then we map that over to our best practices and policies, and that's how we drive the system. Quick screenshot of our compliance dashboard. We also take all that machine data and turn it into business terms in terms of, okay, what's my posture on cryptography? What's my posture on business continuity management? Okay, on communication, integrity, operations, access control. So these are some of the things that we have categorized our data into. And of course, reporting is a key element. Executives want their reports, and technical folks want their reports, right down to exactly which resources were affected, who are the owners of those resources, and how we can fix them. Okay, all complete remediation steps are included in our reports. High-level dashboards, which are important to keep you focused on specific things. We also identify all the risks. We actually identify all the alerts and group them into risks, and they're shown here by red, medium, red, and so on. Lots of regulations that we support. If there's something you don't see, we can add it pretty quickly, and you can add it yourself with a custom regulation process as well. This is a sample report of ISO 27001. Very simple. It gives you the overall risk rating, and at the bottom it drills down to specific regulation areas and which signatures fail, which policies failed, why they failed, and how you can. Next step is remediate them to be able to do either one-click remediation or to be able to do a manual remediation, where we show you the steps of go to the console, do this, click here, all those steps are included, and all the historical data is tracked, and all the resources that are affected are also noted in different boxes. Health dashboard, keeping track of your progress over time, and some cost, high level, basically high level costings, where things that are hanging out there that should not be floating, and so there's reports on that. Okay, so with that, most of you probably ready to ask some questions at this point, so I can take those. So if you open your chat box, we can address those for you. Okay. Um, so I see first question coming in around, uh, where do you, how have you selected your policies for encryption testing? Well, so encryption. So first of all, we go by cloud vendors' best practices first. Okay, that's the first thing we look at. Then the second thing we look at is the regulations themselves, like NIST, HIPAA, PCI, and so on. What are they asking for, and what they want us to check for those areas. And then we also look at the third box, which is recent hacks, right? And then the last one is basically looking at uh, things that are people are talking about on the internet. So we combine all those four areas. We have a very well disciplined practice here around that, and we combine all those four areas to come up with our policies. And so and they're very well defined around those four principles. And then from there, we actually do the testing, control, and write that out. Okay, next question is, has someone certified your compliance reporting? So we get asked that question once in a while, and I'm glad you're asking that here for the rest of the folks in the audience. Frankly, this area is so new that if you were to go to any big four firms and show them our report, most of them will be scratching their heads for the first 5, 10, 20 minutes. And then they're going to say, well, can you explain what this report is saying? So we have to explain our architecture, our testing control methods, and then we have to kind of educate them how these control methods map to the regulation themselves. And the minute they see that, it's like a click. It's like a light bulb turns on, and they say, "My God, this is amazing. This saves so much time, and it's extremely accurate, and you have all the data behind it." And we say, "Yes, yes, and then yes." So that's the answer. Um, how do you license your product? So our licensing is pretty straightforward. It's on a usage-based model. And our pricing, by the way, is on the website, so we don't hide it from anybody. It's about $5 to $9 per instance per month. Okay, and definition of an instance is EC2 is an instance, DynamoDB, RDS, and Elasticsearch. So those are the instances, and Redshift. So those are the instance units that we look at. Okay. Question around how do you compare to Newsys or those types of products? Fairly common question asked around Newsys and other products. Even people ask, how do you compare to Splunk? So first of all, there are categories. Some products are log management tools. Some products are pen testing tools, static and dynamic analysis tool, and some are vulnerability checking tools, like what's the version level on your OSs. Okay, we Cloud Gnosis don't do any of those things. We don't do any of those things. We are a complementary product that sits on top of all of that, but our core focus is around infrastructure, configuration, security groups, making sure that everything works well and it maps back to your compliance or to your own best practices. That's really what our focus is. So Newsys does pretty much, pen testing, static and dynamic type of, mostly dynamic analysis, OWASP testing, those sort of things. We don't do any of that. So we're complementary to that capability. Okay. Okay. Next question coming in around, how do you install agents to analyze machine data? The answer is no. I think it was in my slide that we are an agentless capability. We don't do any agents. It's literally we can connect to your platform in 5 minutes with a IAM role that's specific to us, and we follow Amazon security best practices around using what is called STS, secure token service. That's what we use to actually connect to your platform and then pull the data. We only pull metadata, so we're not pulling in any S3 actual data itself. because we don't have rights to it. You only give us very limited rights as part of your IAM policy that we provide to you. So yeah, that's pretty much how we connect, and within 5 minutes we have all of your data, and then we're running machine analysis on that data, and then bringing in to bear all the best practices, and we compare everything, and then we generate an audit compliance report from that. And then of course, there and then from there, you can run all kinds of remediations and so on. We offer a the free assessment. It's self-service. No salespeople are involved in the middle, right? Not too many people like salespeople, so you can just kind of go ahead, open a trial, run it through, and see the system for yourself on your data, free of charge. No credit card required. Okay, I think we answered quite a few questions. Again, I want to keep this recording pretty straight. This session to a 35 minutes, so we're getting over. Thank you all for joining today, and look forward to working with you. And do check our next webinar as well. It's going to be an interesting topic to be announced, and give it a shot on our platform. Thank you, and have a good day. Bye-bye.